If you've been waiting for a sign that this is the year you stop drifting, this is it. I went back through my episodes from 2025 and pulled out the 8 character lessons that hit the hardest, the ones that changed how I think, not just how I talk. Because 2026 is either going to be the year you deliberately become more dangerous with your life, or just another year that you quietly repeat the same chapter. This episode isn't about motivation, it's about behavior. Every lesson in this episode has survived decades, if not centuries, of storytelling pressure. These characters didn't win because they were just confident. They won because they knew how to act correctly under pressure. As you listen, ask yourself, what could my life look like if I lived just some of these principles? Using even 2 of them consistently, and your year will not look the same as any other year you have ever lived before. So let's dive in. This is Jameson Olson. You're listening to Becoming the Main Character, and today we're going over the top 8 lessons that will make you a protagonist in 2026. Let's dive in. Okay, the first lesson comes from To Kill a Mockingbird. So with the format with each of these, I'll give you the story context, the lesson as I presented it initially, and some thoughts on how you can actually apply it in your life in this next year. So this is a phrase that Atticus used repeatedly across very different emotional moments in the story. He says it when Jem is humiliated and frustrated by the people publicly insulting his father. He uses it when Scout is afraid of being emotionally abandoned. He uses it when Scout is shattered by the guilty verdict for Tom Robinson. And that sentence is, now is not the time to worry. And it's important to note, Atticus doesn't use that line to minimize the injustice. He never lies about the odds. He doesn't claim that everything's going to be okay, because he already understood that he was going up against a very biased jury that was most likely going to come back with a guilty verdict for Tom. And yet, he prepares for the appeal. He stays composed. He keeps his energy available for action. Worry would feel justified, but it would ultimately be useless. Now is not the time to worry, because worry pretends to be responsibility. It makes you feel like you're doing the right thing. But in reality, it is energy expenditure with 0 leverage. There are only 2 productive responses when you feel concern. You can analyze the situation for any actions that you could take that would improve your odds, or you can accept that there's nothing more you can do and all you can do is wait. Anything else is emotional self-sabotage. Atticus doesn't suppress fear. He just refuses to bleed his emotional energy early. Now is not the time to worry. It works because it doesn't argue with the emotion. It just postpones it indefinitely. Either it will turn out fine and you didn't need to spend any energy worrying in the first place, or if it does go wrong, at least you will be in better shape to deal with it when it truly becomes an issue, rather than already being exhausted from worrying for hours or days. It reminds me of that part from Grapes of Wrath where Ma Jode says that she doesn't want to worry about the future because it's just like living a bunch of fake lives that will never happen and just make her feel stressed out. So situational awareness that leads to action is good. That is where the biological response that has historically saved our ancestors from an attack is helpful. But worrying that just leads to spiraling does no good. So when you're thinking about how you can apply this idea of now is not the time to worry, it's about separating the act of evaluating from the act of ruminating. You evaluate the situation once and see if there's something that you can do. And if there is, do that thing. It will make you feel better about your odds. If there isn't, there's nothing left to do. And when it comes to how you can apply this, I'm going to use one example so I can do a detailed walkthrough of how you can say now is not the time to worry. And we're going to use job applications. And you can apply this in so many different situations. But if you're applying for a job, you get an interview scheduled. That's great. And you may start to worry about how the interview is going to go. But instead of worrying, you can say, okay, what prep can I be doing? Research the company, research the role, research the person who's going to be interviewing you. Research anything around the skill sets that you may need in the role that you can bring up. Just prepare like crazy, because that's the only way to ward off that feeling of if you're going to be good enough in the interview or not. Because before the interview happens is not the time to worry. Moving on to the day of the interview, as long as you make sure you've got clean clothes that look good, you've brushed your teeth, you've combed your hair, you show up early, doing those things undermines the instinct to worry because it's the best you can do. And even post-interview, I'm going to use a tip that I've used in jobs a lot, and you can use it now too. Did you know you can make a good impression even after an interview without being annoying about it? I'm not saying by following up and asking for timeline of when to hear back or stuff like that. What I do is I think of the question that I was the least satisfied with my answer, because there's always one, right? There's always one that either you're totally caught off guard or you just didn't like how it came out. So a couple hours after the interview, I'll send an email that just says, hey, thank you so much for your time today. It was bugging me that I didn't have a better answer to X question, so I thought about it some more, and here's what I really think. First of all, it can erase your weakest answer in the entire interview. Secondly, it shows them that you don't just fire a shot and then walk away. You stick to it until you're satisfied with the result. And also, it lets me walk away knowing I did the best I could in the interview, and if they choose someone else, there was just a better option out there. And then while you're waiting to hear back, that is when the worry is the worst, right? Because you just need to know and you're dying to get the answer. In that case, I would also say now is not the time to worry. It's the time to be applying to more jobs just in case. At every step, there are actions you can take that ward off that feeling of worry. And all of them are infinitely more productive than letting your mind death spiral into wasting energy. Because if your feeling of worry doesn't end in a decision or an action, it's just theft. Theft from your emotional reserves. Theft from the energy you could be using in other ways. Now is not the time to worry. Now, the second lesson, the primary part of it comes from Snow White, and that was kind of a small episode, but this is just such an important idea to consider. And it's that some people will just hate you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because in the story of Snow White, she is targeted for something that she didn't only not choose, she's not even aware of. She's never antagonized the queen, but the queen has marked her as enemy number one. Snow White has never been competing with her stepmom, but that woman has sworn to kill her. The queen's hatred just existed in a way that Snow White was never going to be aware of, because it was rooted in the queen's own identity being threatened, which is a good time to remind you the true villain in that story is the mirror, because at one point the queen asks who's the fairest in all the land, and the mirror says basically, well, you're the fairest in this land, but FYI, Snow White is still alive in a different part of the country, and she is way hotter than you are. But anyway, Snow White does not try to fix things because she doesn't even know there's something that needs to be fixed. But in this situation, even if she did know, there's nothing she could do except like maybe disfigure her face until the mirror doesn't register as pretty, but that's a terrible choice. Even if she had had the ability to confront her stepmom, she probably wouldn't have gotten a straight answer out of her. The queen was never going to say, I have to be the prettiest in the land and the mirror says it's you, so I'm going to kill you for the sake of my identity, which is a great reminder that some antagonism is not solvable. Trying to understand irrational hostility, it feels mature. It feels like you're a big person for trying to fix the situation, but it keeps you emotionally trapped. It's this victim mindset of, why is this happening to me? Or if they only knew me, they'd realize that I'm not a bad person. But the truth is that yes, it's not fair, but it is happening. And no, there's no guarantee they would change their mind if you just had a chance to talk with them. So don't waste your breath. The hero's mindset would say, okay, this is now an obstacle. What is my move? Needing universal approval is incompatible with progress. So stop trying to win over someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. If there's a friend in your social group who seems hell-bent on making you seem like the bad guy, and after maybe an attempt or two, it's obvious that they have a reason to not like you that they're not willing to share or work through, probably the best use of your energy in that situation would be to focus on being a good enough friend to the others in that group that they will know the mean person is the one who's causing problems and not you. But whether it's social circles, work, whatever, you need to decide whose opinion actually matters and ignore the rest without resentment. And it's fair to say that as you focus on growing from who you are today to who you want to be tomorrow, that growth will create friction. And there may be people that you need to be willing to let go of because they won't be okay. Because as they see you rise, they will find reasons to not like you. If you're experiencing hostility, treat it like weather. It's inconvenient, but it's not personal. It is not a judgment of your worth. And kind of along these lines, a tie-in to this lesson is from Gandalf, which don't worry, we're going to get a lot more of Lord of the Rings here in a minute. But in my Gandalf analysis episode, I talked about how he is repeatedly accused of seeking power. And ironically, the people who accuse them of this are the ones who are actually desperate for power. Saruman and Denethor both resent him because he is actually effective at what he's doing and they are stuck. Their criticism is not insight, it's projection. And Gandalf never pauses his mission to bother trying to defend his character. Basically, they hate him because they ain't him. And people will hate you for the things they are envious of. Oftentimes, the reason that people hate you without you knowing why, it's because they are envious of something, just like the Queen was envious of how beautiful Snow White was. So, when you accept that sometimes there will be people who hate you for reasons that you could never know or understand, why would you waste time trying to change their opinions of you? They're not on your journey. Okay, the third lesson comes from my Great Gatsby character analysis episode, and it's this idea of you need to create more storied events. Let me refresh you on one part of the Great Gatsby story that's actually mostly overlooked. It's back when he is not Jay Gatsby, but James Gatz. And do you remember the story of how he was walking along the lake and he knew a storm was coming and he saw like a yacht parked in a place that was definitely going to be in trouble maybe within the hour from this approaching storm? The man who owned that yacht happened to be Dan Cody. James Gatz borrowed a rowboat, went out to the yacht, warned the man, and that's how his apprenticeship, or whatever you call it, to the rich Dan Cody that ended up turning him into Jay Gatsby started. Now, James Gatz couldn't have known the outcome. Dan Cody could have ignored him. He could have just said thank you and left, but instead, it becomes a turning point in his life. Gatsby's entire trajectory begins with initiative without guarantee. My money is on the fact that a character like James Gatz wouldn't have risked the storm to row out to the rich man's yacht purely out of the goodness of his heart. He knew there was a possibility of something happening. Now, I'm borrowing this idea from Robert McKee, who has written books on all different aspects of storytelling and screenwriting. And he talks about how your entire life is composed of events. Most of them are neutral. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you get in your car to go to work. Things that individually have no bearing on the course of your life. But a storied event is something that flips a switch. It's something that actually changes the direction you're headed in, for good or bad. And people who live their most heroic, fulfilling life learn to manufacture potentially trajectory-shifting moments, or to take advantage of the ones that naturally present themselves. Because a storied event is not about certainty, it's about exposure to possibility. Because if you're waiting for permission, that just basically guarantees stagnation. Fate favors motion. Storied events stack up. The more storied events in your life, the more fulfilled you will be. You should learn to seek them out. And as a quick reminder, an example of an event versus a storied event. You go to the grocery store every single week. You buy your groceries, you go home, nothing significant happens. But what if one week you go in and you see the most beautiful man or woman you've ever seen and you notice they don't have a ring on their finger? Do you go talk to them? It could turn out to be nothing, but it could turn out to be the start of a new relationship. That is the potential of a storied event because of a choice you made in a situation that otherwise would have resulted in nothing. So in 2026, look to volunteer for the special project at work that will put you in sight of the executive team. DM that person who you would love to collaborate with, or submit your writing to that publication. In short, it's about making choices that put you in a spot of vulnerability, because being in a vulnerable state means change is likely. When things are too stable, change does not happen. You can't have amazing things happen to you if you don't let yourself be exposed to some chances for rejection. Create opportunities for storied events in your life in 2026. Okay, next is the big one. I'm calling this the Lord of the Rings mega lesson because it spans across all 3 books. And if you recall from those episodes, the final lessons all kind of stacked. They basically escalated from one to the next. And it started with the Fellowship, where the final takeaway was, do it scared. Because Frodo is not brave in the traditional sense. He doubts himself constantly. He didn't seek any sort of adventure or responsibility. He, in fact, wishes the ring had never come to him and assumes that others would have been way better suited than him to carry it. He moves while afraid. And remember, Frodo does not generate courage internally. He borrows it by thinking of Bilbo. He remembers Bilbo's stories, Bilbo's endurance, and how Bilbo also dug deep when he didn't feel heroic. A great example of that was in the Barrow Downs when he is inside that tomb. His friends have this magical sword dangling over their necks, and the Barrow Wight is singing this terrifying song as it crawls towards the sword. He's paralyzed by fear until he remembers Bilbo and how he faced his fears on the journey to the Lonely Mountain. It happens again at Caradhras when he is feeling shame at the idea of quitting early and having to go back and tell Bilbo that he turned around because of some snow. And so Frodo doesn't wait for fear to disappear. He acts with fear riding shotgun to him. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is movement despite fear. If you're waiting to feel brave, that is a trap. Fear may never leave, and it definitely won't until you've actually taken some steps that prove that the fear was not as significant as you initially thought. Frodo succeeds because he doesn't require confidence. He just requires correct actions when it matters, which he does by modeling his uncle Bilbo. Basically asking what would Bilbo do short circuits the paralysis that he feels. So to sum that up, fear is not a stop sign. It is the cost of entry. And so moving on, we have the 2 towers where the main takeaway was do it when everything is going wrong. If you remember, by the end of the 2 towers, everything was shattered. The Fellowship was destroyed. Frodo is poisoned and captive in a tower. Sam is alone trying to find a way to break into the tower against a lot of orcs. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli have been sidetracked the entire book, chasing down Merry and Pippin, getting sucked into Rohan's war that they had no expectation to be a part of. Nobody feels on track. In fact, progress feels invisible. Every character is asking internally, how is this getting me closer to my goal? The distance feels greater than when they started, basically. And if you remember Sam's monologue from that book, it reframes everything, where he talks about how the great stories didn't feel great while they were happening. It's just that the heroes kept going even when it didn't make sense. We talked about how Act 2 often in real life feels so much longer than the Act 2s that we read about or watch on screen. This is where most people quit because the effort and the reward feel disconnected. The excitement of the start is behind us and the end is too far away to pull us towards it. And so the mistake we make is assuming that progress is only happening when we feel like we are making progress, when progress often feels like derailment. And at that stage, endurance, not inspiration, becomes the skill. Strategy matters more than motivation. Things like pacing, energy conservation, refusal to catastrophize detours. What happens when the situation you find yourself in doesn't look anything like the vision you had at the beginning? You need to stop asking, is this worth it? And start reminding yourself of how high the stakes are. Because that's the problem, at least in my experience of when I've given up in the middle of what should have been a really important goal that I was working on. It's that when I'm so deep in the middle, I've forgotten the inspiration of the beginning, and I'm so far from the end that I'm not feeling that adrenaline to push me forward. And all I can think about is how much pain I'm feeling right now. Pain that could go away if I just stop trying. Oh, wouldn't that feel so good? And my best advice for helping you get out of that trap of giving into the pain of the middle is that you have to keep the stakes high. Now, in Lord of the Rings, everyone is literally trying to stave off the end of the world as they know it, so it's pretty easy to remember the stakes. In your life, with your goals, the stakes may be way more buried, especially if it's a personal goal that there aren't other people to share it with. And when we're in the middle, we forget the stakes because we're focused on the pain of the effort. But if we focus on how much we lose when we give up, that can help stave off the feeling of, oh, it would be so nice to just stop trying right now. And now moving on to the Return of the King episode, we talk about doing it when you have lost all hope. So it was do it scared, do it when nothing's going right, and do it when you have lost all hope. Now, the context, obviously, in this part of the story is that by the time we reach this final act, Frodo openly states that he has no hope left. It's not an emotional collapse. It's just an honest assessment on his part. They are starving, they're exhausted, they are isolated in Mordor. They're carrying a burden that is actively destroying Frodo from the inside. But he keeps moving, not because he believes he will succeed, but because not moving is unthinkable. Meanwhile, in another part of Middle-earth, Aragorn is gathering the captains of the West while Gandalf presents a plan to march on the Black Gate. Everyone in that room understands the truth. This is not a battle they can win. Their army is massively outnumbered. Sauron's full strength has not even been revealed yet. And Aragorn doesn't try to mislead them. He doesn't promise victory. He basically tells them this is probably a suicide mission. And yet he asks them to march anyway. Not because he can promise them that they will defeat Sauron and they will have good lives, but to draw his eye so that Frodo and Sam have a chance. Aragorn leads an army fully prepared to die, not for glory, not for conquest, but so that two hobbits may possibly finish a task that no one else can do. And in both of these cases, with Frodo and Aragorn, this is heroism at its highest resolution. Frodo and Aragorn are doing the same thing in different forms. They are continuing in the absence of hope because others depend on it. And this is the critical shift from personal endurance to forgetting yourself. Hope disappears because hope is about you surviving the outcome and you going on to live a beautiful life. At this stage, outcomes no longer matter. And what matters is your fidelity to your duty. Aragorn marches not because he thinks he's going to survive, but because someone has to give a chance for evil to be upturned. Frodo keeps walking not because he thinks he's going to make it out of Mordor alive, but because if he stops, he knows that everyone else dies. This is the dividing line. The villain would say, the world is broken, I'm just going to take what I can while I'm still alive. The victim says, the world is broken, please someone save me. And the hero says, the world is broken, but I will make a stand. Gandalf names this philosophy explicitly when he says, it is not our task to master all the tides of the world, but to uproot what evil we can, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. Heroism in this situation is no longer about bravery or resilience or even identity. It's about stewardship. A willingness to suffer or even die so that others may inherit a world worth living in. So what does this look like when you're not actually being asked to sacrifice your life in a fiery Mordor doom situation? Put simply, I just say it means looking outside of your own benefit in situations where you could be of great benefit to others at cost to yourself. The pressure of this day and age is to just focus on you and what you can get out of your situations in your life. And that's not always a bad thing because you know what they say, like you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to have resources and energy in order to help other people. But it feels like we have a pretty cynic bent around that idea now where it's just about getting what's mine at the cost of other people. But true heroism involves understanding what is on the line, not only for you, but for the people you care about, and being aware of what choices you could make that would improve the lives of others, even if it's at cost to yourself. Now, I'm not telling you you have to go and be a sacrificial lamb and just lay down so that other people can have a great life while you suffer indefinitely. But I'm saying if you are dedicated to figuring out how you can try to approach that level of hero, it involves the moral courage to accept that it's not always about you. And sometimes you may just be of service so that others can have a better life. Because if someone doesn't do it, everyone is going to suffer. So in Fellowship, we learn that courage means acting in spite of fear. In the Two Towers, we learn that it means acting in spite of chaos. And in Return of the King, we learn that it means acting despite hopelessness. And the reason that's possible, the reason Aragorn can march into death and Frodo can crawl towards Mount Doom, is because at the highest level of heroism, the self is no longer the point. Hope may be optional, but responsibility is not. And here's the unifying truth between these three different virtues, because they're actually just one virtue under increasing pressure. The Fellowship tests, can you act in spite of fear? Two Towers tests, can you act even though you're getting no positive feedback? And Return of the King tests, can you act even when there's no chance in your mind of success? It's the same muscle, just under different weight. But in all three, it's about your ability to separate the idea of correct action from your emotional instincts. Because fear will say, wait a minute. Chaos will say, it's time to quit. Hopelessness will say, what is the point? And the hero answers all three the same. This is still mine to do. This is just making me want to go read Lord of the Rings all over again. Luckily, we've got one more lesson from Lord of the Rings, so we're not done yet. Lesson 5 for becoming a protagonist in 2026 comes from the Frodo character analysis, and it's about the idea of radical acceptance. Frodo's journey doesn't begin with him radically accepting. In fact, for most of the entire book of the Fellowship, he is living in a state of partial denial. Near the beginning, when he says, I wish this need not have happened in my time, there are repeated attempts of him handing the ring off to someone more qualified. He intellectually understands the stakes early, but emotionally, he's resisting the reality of being the one. He hopes Gandalf will solve the problem. He hopes Aragorn will take it for him. His goal is just that the burden will be reassigned to somebody. And that confrontation with Boromir is the turning point. Because Frodo sees firsthand that strength does not equal immunity to this corruptible ring. At Amon Hen, Frodo experiences clarity for the first time, and instead of fear or bargaining, he finally feels resolve. And these were his own words that mark the shift. Quote, I will do now what I must. From that moment forward, he could still hate the path that he's on, which he does, and he expresses that, but he does so in a way that doesn't look to be rid of the ring anymore, because he understands that he can long to be in the Shire as much as he wants, but if he doesn't step up to the plate, the Shire may not be around for him to go back to. And so what is radical acceptance? What does that look like? It is the full acknowledgement of reality as it is, not as you wish it was. It's the moment that you stop negotiating, fantasizing, postponing. It is the psychological shift from this shouldn't be happening to this is happening, now what? You may remember in that episode, I brought up examples of people who acted like radical acceptance was just about accepting how sucky life is and that you'll be better off if you accept that. But no, that's not what it is. It's not giving up. It's not laying down. It's not saying this is fine. It's not nihilism. The confusion comes from people fixating on the word accept and ignoring what follows it, which is agency. The victim mindset says this shouldn't be happening and why me, or until this changes, there's nothing that I can do. The hero mindset would say, I hate that this is happening, but since it is, what am I going to do about it? Frodo and Gandalf share that same wish, because you remember when Frodo says, I wish this wasn't happening in my time? Gandalf says, so do I. But the difference is, Frodo uses this wish as justification for hesitating. Gandalf uses acceptance as justification for action. And radical acceptance is the bridge between the two, because reality does not care about fairness. This shouldn't be happening has zero causal power. Continuing to argue with reality just drains you of energy, and it delays action, which will end up compounding your suffering. Radical acceptance is heroic because it restores the clarity you need to make choices. Frodo's power doesn't come from optimism. It comes from being aligned with the reality of his situation. And what that can look like in your real life, and this is one that's touching a nerve for me personally, is the idea of aging and accepting that your health is going to be impacted. No, I'm not as fast as I used to be. No, I'm not as flexible. Actually, I was never flexible. Let's be real about that. But noticing the changes in your body, are you just going to say, oh, I'm too young to be going through this. This isn't fair. Or do you say, it's not going to get any better than it is now, but what can I do to stave off the aging process? Once you accept that it's happening, whether you like it or not, you can start figuring out how to make the best of the situation. Acceptance allows adaptation, whereas resistance just delays it. So regardless of what application in life you're looking to find radical acceptance in, the key is that it's not just accepting where you're at and saying, this is fine, I guess. It's saying, this is real, and now I can start assessing what to do about it. Okay, lesson 6, and I'll be honest, this is one of my favorites from the entire year. I remember going for long walks, trying to piece together everything I was feeling about this story and how I could make it concrete and very applicable, because it just felt like there was some treasure in this story. And I'm talking about the labors of Hercules and the idea that you should stop seeking redemption. Now, if you remember, the whole story is he goes and does these incredible labors because he's trying to find a way to feel cleansed of the guilt of when he was under Hera's spell and he killed his wife and kids. It's horrifying what he did, and the fact that he has to live with that is terrible. And whereas pop culture or more modern interpretations of the story make Hercules feel like he's cleansed of his guilt at the end, the original myths don't support that. There's no ceremony, there's no absolution. After he's done these incredibly impossible tasks, he just keeps going. The labors don't erase things, they restore momentum to his life, but they don't restore innocence. Because if you recall in that episode, I talked about the idea of a MacGuffin, which is a storytelling term for the thing that the characters act like is the most important thing, but it ultimately doesn't matter. And redemption, in my opinion, is kind of a MacGuffin. We spend our lives seeking redemption from our biggest mistakes, but it's not a real thing. You can't hold on to it. There's no certificate of you have been redeemed. And even if it's a situation where there is a third party who claims to have the authority to give you redemption, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to feel that peace inside of your brain. And if there's something that we feel like we need redemption from, that shame that we feel, it immobilizes us. But motion, continuing to be a positive contributor, that metabolizes your guilt. You can't erase your mistakes, but you can bury them with enough positive evidence that the mistakes seem like an anomaly. Redemption isn't something you can possess, and you can't rely on it as a saving grace for your mental state. So after failure, stop waiting to feel forgiven and just start doing useful things. Through continued action, you stack up the evidence that your greatest mistake is not who you are. God, such a quick one, but I loved that episode, and that lesson is one of the more powerful from the entire year. Moving on to lesson number 7. This is another one I love because it's probably the one I've been actively thinking about using the most in my own life. And it's the idea of having the confidence to outlast your problems, which this comes from Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles. Because one of the most striking things about Sherlock in that book is how unserious he is about when he makes mistakes. He doesn't fear messing up, and he doesn't try to hide them. He does not reinterpret them to protect his ego. In fact, early in the story, there's that moment where Holmes and Watson are tracking a key suspect in London and they lose him due to being a little too eager. And Holmes immediately acknowledges the error, even joking with Watson that Watson will have to include this failure alongside his triumphs the next time he writes about him. But later, in one of the most important moments of the book, in terms of understanding the hero of our story, Holmes receives confirmation that 3 different investigative threads that he had were all dead. All 3 of them came back as non-starters because they basically put him back to square one. And Holmes's response is not frustration or doubt. He famously says to Watson, quote, "There is nothing more stimulating than a case where everything goes against you. We must cast around for another scent." And that line tells us everything. It's that difficulty does not threaten Holmes's identity. If anything, it activates it. Sherlock's confidence is not based on being right all the time and avoiding ever making mistakes. It's based on something far more durable. His faith that given enough time, he will figure it out. This is why mistakes don't shame him. Dead ends don't discourage him. To Holmes, failure isn't a verdict. It's just information. And this is the key distinction. Fragile confidence requires constant success, but durable confidence assumes there will be turbulent moments. Holmes doesn't ask, what if I can't solve this? Instead, he asks, what approach have I not tried yet? He treats problems like puzzles that he knows will not outlast him. His success is not brilliance alone, it is endurance paired with belief. And for most of us, when we quit things, it's not because the problem is unsolvable. We quit because we decide that it's not worth the time and resources it would take to actually figure it out. And there are problems that's the right call to make, problems that aren't worth solving. But the problem is when that becomes the default of it's too hard to figure out, so I'm just not going to keep trying. Because then the next time we have a problem that's maybe more important to solve, we're still going to instinctually feel a desire to quit when things get hard. But for Sherlock Holmes and for you in 2026 and beyond, setbacks aren't speaking truths about you. They're only speaking about the path that you need to go down. And that's why difficulty excites him, because the harder the problem, there are far fewer people who would ever be willing to persist through the thick of it. And it's that willingness to grind it out that helps Holmes win, not by brilliance alone, but by outlasting the confusion and the setbacks that it takes to get to the right answer. So in your complex goals, your businesses, your creative works, the things you're trying to master, stop treating early failures or even late stage failures as diagnosis of your bad potential. Treat them as part of the journey, the obstacle that is the way. And if you can get to where when something fails, your internal response is good, that's one less way that this doesn't work. There's no way that you won't eventually win. When you're trying to learn hard and rare skills, expect to be wrong repeatedly. If being wrong feels like danger, you're going to avoid trying to go deep. Confidence grows when you survive being wrong, not when you avoid it. And if you can shift your identity from I need to get this right to I won't stop until I get it right, time becomes your greatest advantage. This all boils down to the simple idea of not letting the problem defeat you because you outlast the problem. Okay, we've got one more, and you may have noticed this has been chronological based on when I've done the episodes, but I saved this one for last. And if you're really sharp, you may have an idea what it is, because when I first told this lesson, I said this is right up there with Lower the Boats from Moby Dick as one of my absolute favorite lessons I've ever done. And it comes to us from Arrival, or the story of your life. So this was kind of an abstract lesson. It's not as simple as just, oh, look at the choice that she made at this moment. But it's taking two ideas that are presented to us in the story and combining them into what felt like a super profound realization to me. And so the first idea is this radical concept that Arrival pitches us of, if you knew the future, you would not change it and you would have no desire to change it, which is so counterintuitive to every other story that talks about seeing the future, where we then go buy the winning lottery ticket or whatever it is in an attempt to radically change our life. The story also introduces us to Fermat's principle, which is that light does not travel the straightest path, it travels the fastest path. It is a maximizing, minimizing principle, which says light will bend and refract however much it has to in order to get to its destination the fastest, which does not guarantee a straight line. And that doesn't mean that something has gone wrong. And that's exemplified by the heptapods, who perceive time non-linearly. They know the outcomes in advance, and yet they still have to go through the steps, the speeches, the acts. They know what's going to happen, but it won't happen until they do the things they have to do. They experience each moment fully, and the knowledge of the end does not give them a way to shortcut the journey. If anything, it just kind of confirms it. And so I put those two ideas together into this core metaphor that every massive thing you want to achieve in life is like hunting for buried treasure. Imagine a classic treasure map, aged parchment, hand-drawn lines, strange landmarks. And if I took every one of you who just visualized a treasure map and we actually made versions of them, they would look vastly different. But the one universal feature would be that none of them would have straight lines. Because a straight line would make the map pointless. You would just draw an X and you would be like, okay, here we are. The journey wouldn't be necessary. It's the curves and the zigzags and the backtracks that are features, not flaws. They are instructions, and each landmark confirms that you are on the right path. Because if you have a treasure map, you can see where the X is, and you could just say, well, I'm just going to head in this direction because I think that's where I'm headed. You probably are never going to find the treasure that way, or at least not nearly as fast as if you follow the prescribed 2 miles due east until you find the rock shaped like a skull, and then 1 mile northwest until you get to the, like the way that treasure maps are built out. Those deviations from a straight line are not mistakes. They are the only way to know you are not lost. Most people secretly believe that success should feel linear, growth should feel affirming, and when it doesn't, they assume that something's wrong. But heroic journeys are not optimized for comfort or ease. They are optimized for getting to your destination no matter what. The fastest path may include heartbreak. It may include years of doing the boring thing. It may include delays that you wish didn't have to happen. But the straight line thinking creates despair because it interprets friction as failure. Treasure map thinking interprets friction as confirmation that you are on track. The zigzag is the proof. Having angsty teenagers means you have successfully kept those helpless babies alive to be this old, and they are at least halfway on their way to being a well-adjusted adult. Having competitors against your business means that your product has market value. Experiencing pain is not evidence of misalignment. It's probably evidence that you're onto something. And so the key shift becomes, instead of why is this happening to me, saying which landmark am I passing? And the way this ties back to the idea of not changing the future if you knew it, is that when you're on that zigzagging path on the way to the treasure map, you may know that you have to hit the skull-shaped rock, and when you see it, you're going to run towards it because you know it means you're headed in the right direction. Even if in purely geographic terms, it does mean you are technically moving further away from your end destination. With career paths, creative paths, family paths, whatever it is, it's not faster to look at the map and try to redraw it so it's shorter with things like get-rich-quick schemes. The fastest way to guarantee you make it to your end destination is to accept that the steps are not in a straight line. Conflicts, feeling of distance, awkward phases, none of these are bad things. They are the terrain of getting from point A to point B. Growth requires walking through them, not looking for ways to avoid them. Every single entrepreneur has endless stories of when they almost went bankrupt or when things went tragically wrong with a shipment delivery. That should tell you everything you need to know about if you want to be an entrepreneur. Don't expect smooth seas. Don't expect a straight line to the end goal. And when things do happen, as long as you can outlast them, going back to the Sherlock lesson, those very obstacles are the signals that you are going in the right direction. Whew, okay. That was, I had so many lessons. There were like 70 something lessons from the stories I covered this year. I really wanted to focus on as few as possible so they would have more significance. So I was able to narrow it down to these 8. And now I want to close it out by saying you don't need a new personality in 2026. You just need to make a decision about the kind of person you want to be when things get hard. Because the truth is, you already know what happens when you don't decide. You end up right here. Another year has passed. Your goals keep getting pushed for further down the road. Your story doesn't progress. 2026 isn't going to ask you if you're talented. It's going to ask if you're going to continue. When feelings of worry show up, are you going to act or just mentally spiral? When people turn on you, are you going to stall or adapt? When the path twists, will you trust the map? When hope disappears, will you keep walking? That can make the difference between not winners and losers, but between lives that compound and lives that just quietly repeat over and over again. Pick even just one lesson, and make it a law for who you are going to be as a protagonist in 2026. And don't let 2026 pass without you becoming someone who's telling a story that you would actually want to read about. I believe in you. You've got the ability to make this the best year you've ever had if you accept the truth about where you are and understand that you have it within you to become more than you currently find yourself to be. I'm working on my own stuff. We're in this journey together, and we're going to keep examining stories that exemplify these principles to make it easier for us to understand how we can achieve these things in our own lives. I'm Jameson Olson. This has been the end of year review for Becoming the Main Character. I'm so thankful to you that you listen to the show and that you like what I'm doing here. I hope I can continue to bring you not only entertainment, but value in understanding what it takes to live more heroically in your day-to-day life. So happy New Year to everyone out there. Pick just one of these lessons, maybe two, but I would actually discourage you from trying to do more because at that point, you're not prioritizing anything. Pick what resonated the deepest to you, where you feel a gap, where you feel like you could improve. And I dare you to implement it and see if you don't find your life is massively changed. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.